All right, guys, good afternoon. Are we sufficiently caffeinated? Beautiful, then we'll begin. So my name, as you just heard, is Mark Ormrod. I am not an estate agent, despite my snazzy suit. I'm actually a former Royal Marines commando. And a number of years ago now, back on Christmas Eve 2007, I was injured whilst out on tour in Afghanistan. And as a result, became the UK's first triple amputee from the conflict. And I've been very kindly invited along here today to share part of my story with you all and tell you all a little bit about the day that I got injured. I'm going to tell you all a little bit about the way that I got injured. But more importantly, I want to talk about how through setting myself goals, getting myself around the right kind of people, and proactively managing my mindset through some of the obstacles and challenges that I faced, I was able to take my life from where it was back then right through to where it is today. Now, I'm 41 years old. I know I look 28, but I hope you can appreciate trying to squeeze 41 years of my life into a 45-minute keynote talk is very challenging. And normally what I would do is go back to my teenage years, talk about being a little bit overweight and bullying and et cetera, and what led me to want to join the Royal Marines in the first place. But I think I'm going to skip over that and just kind of give you the quick version so that we can get into the nasty, gritty, bloody guts and gore side of my story, because I know that's what most people want to hear about, right? Yeah. You don't have to be shy, you can admit it, it's fine. So, in a nutshell, and in as quick a time as I can possibly do it, the early part of my life went a little bit like this. I knew I wanted to be a Royal Marine when I was 15 years old. I went to the career centre and applied to join when I was 16. I started my recruit training in 2001 when I was 17, and by the time I turned 18, I had finished training, earned my Green Beret, and was all set to embark on what I thought was going to be a full 22-year career. Now, I joined the Royal Marines in February 2001, finished my training in October that same year, around about 4 weeks after we all witnessed 9/11. And I remember it quite vividly, being stood in the canteen on camp. At that stage of our training, we were all pretty much just doing administrative tasks and marching, getting ready for the big ceremonial pass-out parade. And me and the lads were in the cafe getting a slice of pizza between sessions, and we saw 9/11 happen on the TV. And I remember being a young 18-year-old, very unsure about how I was supposed to feel about that. Quite overwhelmed, quite confused, a little bit scared, and a little bit conflicted, because I'd just been through basically a year of hell, training to be a Royal Marine, constantly told that you're one of the most capable and advanced soldiers on the planet, never really actually thinking that I'm going to have to go test this in the real world, and then I see this happen. And then, because it was in America, I didn't know, do we get involved in this? I was very young, I didn't understand any of the political side of it. But I looked around, and I think everyone else was putting on a bit of false bravado, so I thought I would as well, and cheered a little bit and thought it was great, and then went about my business. Now, early 2002, I was put on a pre-deployment training package to go out to Afghanistan on something that was called Operation Jacana. Now, I have no idea why. After going through all that training and preparing and getting ready to go, at the very last minute, they pulled a lot of us off. That sounded wrong. They stopped a lot of us deploying out to Afghanistan. And I was a little bit upset about that, because I did want to go out and see what this was actually all about. But, we have this mindset in the military where if something rubbish happens, you just get your head down and crack on and push forward. So that's what I did. And I was quite lucky. I got to go out and train in Norway. I got to box for the Royal Marines. I got to sail down to America and do all these exercises and deployments that were outside of the wartime setting. And then 2003 came around and Iraq became our focus. So again, I went into a pre-deployment training cycle. This time, did deploy, just turned 19 years old. And I was sent out on what's called Operation Telic 1, which was the initial push over the Kuwaiti Iraqi border. So we sat in Kuwait for about 8 weeks, got given the green light. I was involved in those first couple hundred people that went over the line. Friends of mine went up to the palace, others to the oil field. I went to a place called Azerbaijan Naval Base, cleaned that place out, set up shop there, and that's where I was due to spend the next 3 months of my life. Now, because I was keen to get out and test myself and see what I could actually do in a real setting, I volunteered to attach myself to an army medical unit as force protection for an ambulance crew. So hopefully if there was any incidents, I could be there looking after them and, at least get to see something, but I didn't. I spent 3 months out there, didn't see anything. Things happened, I just wasn't involved in them. Didn't fire a single round, got a great suntan, but came home and felt a little bit, I don't know if disappointed is the right word, a little bit flat, because I had expectations and they weren't quite met. But again, I came home, got my head down, cracked on with life, and then I met a woman. You know what happens now, don't you? I met someone, she became pregnant with my eldest daughter, Kezia, and so I looked at my life and my career. The minimum term you had to serve in the military back then was 5 years, and I was coming up to that time, but now my life had changed. And I had a daughter due to be born, I had responsibilities. So I decided that I was going to leave the military and start a new job. I didn't know exactly what. I knew it was going to be in the emergency services world, the fire brigade or the police or something similar to that. So I put my notice in to leave, and when you do that, you've got to serve out 12 months. And that 12 months is when you're supposed to sort out all of your affairs and retrain and get all your finances and everything in order so you can smoothly go from the military world to the civilian world. About 10 months into that, unfortunately, or fortunately, when I look back on it, me and my eldest daughter's mother separated. Now, I could have continued my career, took my notice out and carried on, but mentally I'd already made that switch. I was already a civilian in my mind with 8 weeks left to serve. So I carried on, I left, I ended up homeless, sleeping on my car for a little while. I then took some money that the military give you to retrain and a little bit that I had saved, and I flew out to South Africa and I retrained as a bodyguard. I spent 6 weeks out there training, hoping that I would come back, come to London and walk around like Kevin Costner, diving in front of bullets for celebrities. That didn't happen either. I did the training, came back, started working as a nightclub doorman to earn some money while I was waiting for the work to come in. I don't know why. I just really struggled. I think I was only 21, 22 at the time. There's plenty of work around, but I couldn't seem to get any. Now, it was also 2006 when the security industry was starting to be regulated by the SIA. And as a nightclub doorman in that sector, I think they were particularly harsh in that area. They wanted to get rid of all of the thugs and the bullies and professionalize that part of the industry. So me and the guys that I work with, we always seem to be in trouble, putting it lightly. And for me, it was getting worse week after week, and it kind of culminated at one point when there was a huge incident, pretty violent incident, and I was looking at going to prison for a short amount of time. So I panicked. I was sat on my bed at about 4 o'clock in the morning after work one night, looking at where my life was and where it was going, and decided that I didn't really like it and I needed to do something about it. So the Monday morning I went back to the careers centre and I spoke to the Royal Marine recruiter there and told him that I wanted to sign back up and pick up my career where I left off. Now, I'd only been a civilian for about a year, so there was no need to do all our training again. Our training is nearly a year long if you do it in one hit and you factor in all the leave periods, but I just had to do what we call a weapons handling test, a basic fitness test, an annual percentage weapon test. And I still don't know if this was mandatory, but they put me in a CS gas chamber and gassed me with CS canisters. I think it was for their own amusement. But once all those tests were done, I was back in uniform, ready to pick up my career where I left off. Now, this is early 2007. Iraq was kind of being pushed on the back burner a little bit now, and Afghanistan was our main focus again. So I joined my unit, 40 Commando down in Somerset and Taunton, and almost immediately went into another pre-deployment training cycle. Now I knew from this pre-deployment training cycle that the deployment was going to be very, very different. You know, this training was a lot more aggressive, a lot more focused and intentional, I think. So I knew that, you know, the next 6 months when we deploy were going to be a little bit hairy, to say the least. But we did the training and deployed out to Afghanistan on September 7th, 2007. Now, when we got there, we initially went into a place, you might have heard of it, called Camp Bastion. So we flew into this big airfield called Camp Bastion, where we were given a couple of days to acclimatise to this new environment we were working in, to prepare all of our kit and equipment. You have to maintain it very differently in the desert to the Arctic or the woodland or wherever you are. And to run some last-minute training serials with the guys, just to make sure that we were all slick and as well prepared as we possibly could be. And then when we were done, me and a couple of friends were thrown on the back of a Chinook helicopter and flown out to a place called Forward Operating Base Robinson in the southern region of Helmand Province. Now, when we got there, our responsibilities included things like foot patrolling. So we would go into the local villages, we'd engage with the civilians that lived there, we'd provide them with food and water and security. Our overarching mission for that 6 months was to win the hearts and minds of the locals and try and give them a better quality of life. We also acted on any intelligence that we had on things like enemy locations and weapon caches, and we went in and did what it was that we needed to do. And if we weren't proactively out on the ground taking the fight to the enemy, we obviously had a position that we had to defend from any incoming enemy attacks. And for the first 3 months, things have been going pretty well. You know, we have been out on numerous foot patrols, all with varying degrees of success. We had come into contact with the enemy on numerous occasions and never sustained any injuries or any fatalities. So morale within my forward operating base, within my troop, within my section, was very, very high. And on the early hours of Christmas Eve morning, myself and a handful of my friends were called up to the headquarters compound and given a brief on what was to be our next foot patrol. Once we knew what we were doing, we went back to the compound. We started preparing all of our kit and equipment, like we'd done 1,000 times before. And then we headed back up to the HQ compound, formed up by the rear entrance to camp, and we got ready to leave. Now, the idea of this patrol was very, very simple, basic, low-level infantry-style soldiering. And effectively, what they wanted us to do was leave the rear entrance to camp in 2 sections, 2 groups with 8 men in each group. One go north, one go south. We got told to patrol the immediate perimeter of camp, pushing no more than 300 meters from the perimeter wall, and then meet at the front entrance of camp and secure the location and finish up for the day. So basically walk out the back door, go for a little bimble, and then come in the front door. So compared to what we had been doing for the 3 months prior, this was, like I said, very, very basic, low-level infantry-style soldiering. And we weren't given any extra intelligence to give us any extra cause for concern. So the time came, and they gave us a green light. They opened the rear entrance to camp. I was second in command of the group that went north. The other guys went south. And we went out and we did what we were tasked to do. About 5 hours into it, both groups of men then found themselves at the other side of camp. So now we're at the front entrance, ready to secure a location and finish up for the day. Now, the section that I was in happened to be positioned on this high piece of ground, what we called the North Fort. Slightly beneath us, as we looked down off this ridge line, effectively, that we were on, we could kind of see a semi-bird's eye view of Forward Operating Base Robinson that we were working out of. And then down beneath that, just off to the side of the main dirt road that ran through the area, was that other group of men that we had left with earlier in the day. So tactically, being on high ground, we're in a very advantageous position, because not only can we see everything around us, but when you get in a firefight, it's a lot easier to fight going down a hill than it is up. So our job in that instance is to provide what we call overwatch, which is protection for that other group of men. They would then go into camp, get behind the perimeter wall where they're safer, they would return the favor, we'd come off the high feature, go back in. Stuff we've done 1,000 times before, and we drilled it to death. So, like I said, no extra cause for concern. Now, normally, what you want to do if you're out patrolling and you go firm and you stop, you want to get behind a building or a wall or a tree or a rock or something that's going to give you what we call cover from view and cover from fire. But because we were on this high piece of ground, on this ridge line, we didn't have any of those luxuries. Now, about 4 meters to my front, there was like a shallow bowl in the ground. And so I looked around, and you can see the kind of terrain that we're working in. I looked around and I thought, okay, in this scenario, in this environment, with this terrain, with our lack of options, this is going to be the best protection I can give these guys. If we get in this little shallow bowl, get on our bellies, anyone that's looking up at us is going to have a very difficult time to see us, which means they're going to have a very difficult time trying to engage us. So I jumped in. My half of the section jumped in behind. The other half of the section went and they started taking their fire positions. My lads started taking their fire positions while I stood back and observed. There were a couple of kind of checks and last-minute bits and bobs I had to do. Then when they were happy and I was happy, I slowly started walking over towards a position that I selected for myself. And as I got there and I put my right knee on the ground, that was the moment that I knelt on and detonated an improvised explosive device. Now you can see what the terrain is like that we were working in. Very, very sandy, very, very dusty. So when this thing detonated, it created this huge dust cloud. I didn't know what I had done. I didn't feel any pain. I couldn't see anything, but my initial instinct was that we were under attack. I thought someone had fired a rocket on us again, or a mortar that had exploded nearby, that had caused a dust cloud. So my first instinct was find out where this threat is and then neutralize the threat. Now, where I was facing, I knew behind me, about 600 meters, down on the low ground, close to where those other guys were, there was a small rectangular forestry block, like a bunch of trees. And everything else in that area was just like flat farmers' fields, just mud. So in all that chaos, with that huge adrenaline dump and that cortisol spike, despite everything going on, not being able to see, my first instinct was, right, that's where they're going to, if they've got any sense, that's where they're going to attack this from. So I said to myself, in my mind, turn around, Mark. I remember thinking that you turn around, ID the enemy, and start shooting. When you start shooting, the lads will start shooting, we can withdraw, get somewhere safer, and then outflank them, or go wherever and do whatever it is that we need to do. Now, after about 5 times, in my mind of saying, turn around, turn around, turn around, even though I couldn't see anything because this huge dust cloud had been created, I knew that my body wasn't doing what my brain had told it to do, and I couldn't figure out why. So I thought, okay, I'll just wait. I'll wait for this dust cloud to settle, I'll look around, see what's going on, assess the situation, and then make some very, very quick calls on the ground. So we got to about chest height, and I looked around, and I was terrified that my friends had potentially been hurt or killed. Extremely terrified that they'd been hurt or killed. But I couldn't see any of them, so I carried on waiting. And then the dust cloud got about 6 inches from the floor, and it hit the ground and dissipated. Now, when it disappeared, I looked down to where my legs should have been, and they had just been completely torn off from the knees down. Has anyone ever been in any sort of a traumatic accident before, like a car crash or a fall from a height? All right, so you'll probably understand what I'm saying here if you have. It's a very surreal experience. For me, my brain, I think, struggled to process what it was that it was looking at, and I wasn't in any pain. So I sat there looking for about 2 seconds at where my legs should have been and what was left of them, and looking at all this blood and fluid and claret pouring out, but not being in any pain. And I remember it feeling very overwhelming. I wasn't scared, it didn't hurt, it was just overwhelming and very confusing. And I only probably looked for about 2 seconds. Time gets quite distorted when you're doing all this. But then I thought about the rest of my section. And so I started looking around again. And I looked over my right shoulder and I saw Corporal Helsby. Corporal Helsby was the guy in charge of the entire patrol. And his eyes were huge, and all the colour had drained out of his face. And I remember thinking, why does he look like this? He looks like he's in shock. And so I went to look back to my legs to kind of, I think, give my brain some sort of confirmatory signal that what I was looking at was real and something terrible was going on. I had to figure it out. And I got to about this position and I saw my arm lying in the sand. Now, it was still attached to my body, but from my bicep to my wrist, the entire thing had been torn open. I'm not very clever with anatomy, but the upper bone and the lower bone had been completely shattered into a million pieces. My hand was still in relatively good order. And for some reason, I reached down and I picked it up and I kind of held it in front of my face, moved it a little bit, and then dropped it in the sand and just let out this huge scream. Not like a girl, like a man would scream. As the reality and the severity of the situation kind of hit home. I knew in that moment that we weren't under attack. I knew in that moment that I was the guy that had stood on and detonated an improvised explosive device. Now, if you could write down what is the worst possible scenario to evacuate a casualty from, this is probably it. I'm on a high piece of ground. I've read the report that the American Special Forces guys we work with wrote when they cleared the area. I'm on high ground. This little shallow bowl is now 12 feet deep by 15 feet around. There's 6 other improvised explosive devices around me, and the other 7 men in my section, we train not to run in to help the casualty because of the risk of setting off other devices. So I knew that they weren't going to come running in to help me. So with all this blood and claret and stuff coming out and being in this terrible situation, it was going to make my evacuation, pretty tricky. Now, every single man on that patrol is assigned a specific task before we got on patrol in the event of something like this happening. Now, while it's tragic for me to be the guy in the middle, bleeding out, surrounded by improvised explosive devices, it's equally tragic for them to have to go and do that. But not only to do that, to override every emotion that they have as human, not to freeze, not to run, not to disobey orders and do the opposite of what they're trained to do, and run in to help me and risk killing me or them. But every single one of those men did everything to the highest standard that I could ever have asked for. I had one guy who was coordinating all-round defense in case there was a small arms attack follow-up. I had one guy close to me, just constantly talking to keep me conscious and awake. I had a 19-year-old boy on his belly with a bayonet, prodding the ground for other devices and then marking left and right, so when the medic got to me, he had a safe path to get straight to me. And because they did that, when the medic did get to me, he ran straight in, jumped in this crater, gave me some morphine, started applying tourniquets to my legs, and then got me to start applying the tourniquet to my arm just to keep me conscious and to keep me fighting. Now, when he got me to a position where he deemed me stable to move me, he pulled out this stretcher, which was kind of like a tablecloth, but with handles on it, because we're in this huge crater, you couldn't use the rigid one. And he hooked his hands under my armpits, and he dragged me over to the stretcher. Now, that was the first time that I felt any pain. And so I looked down to where the pain came from in my right leg, and coming out of my thigh was like a small, like a thin piece of rope or string covered in blood and sand and dirt. And it went into a boot, into my boot. And again, I don't know why I did this, but I picked the boot up and I look in and my foot was still in there. This piece of string looking thing was like a nerve or a tendon. So where he pulled me, it stretched it and it caused the pain. So the medic then scooped up my foot and what was left of my arm, put it on my stomach, put me on this stretcher. I closed my eyes at this point. He got me out of this crater, down from the high ground to the low ground, threw me in the back of a vehicle, like an all-terrain vehicle, and the driver started driving to get me back in the camp to where the helicopter was due to come and collect me. Now, on the way back in the camp, there was an incline. And again, the terrain is terrible that we were working in. And you had to drive quite aggressively to get up this incline to get into the front gate. And the driver knew this. He'd done it a couple of times. And he got to a point where I think he hit the accelerator, he steered in one direction, he might have even hit a pothole at the same time. But as he did, the medic fell out the back. Now, I thought it was funny because the morphine was kicking in, and I didn't really care about much at that point. But then I fell out after him. Now, as the bottom of my back hit the tailgate of the vehicle the driver swung around, reached out to grab whatever he could grab to kind of hold me half in, half out the vehicle, and ended up grabbing the femur bone that was coming out my right leg. Now, he left the medic at the bottom of the hill with those other 8 men that we were given cover for, so he was very, very safe. He had 8 heavily armed men down there looking after him. They carried on driving, and the last thing I can remember is this Chinook helicopter coming down, the sandstorm that's created from the propeller blades, and the heat from the exhaust kind of beating down on me in the back of this vehicle. And that was the moment that I blacked out. And later on, after having spoke to the medical team, found out that I was declared clinically dead. Now, I don't remember anything on the back of the helicopter, although I have spoke to the entire team that were on that flight that day to understand what happened. And I'm happy to share that because it's quite a phenomenal story if you guys want to hear it. Yeah? Perfect. Okay, so this Chinook lands, I black out, they lower the ramp. There was another guy injured in the blast, Milky. He just got shrapnel in his tricep and shrapnel in his back. And the way we were prioritizing casualties back then is if you've got a guy that's dead and a guy that's dying, as harsh as it sounds, you have to ignore the dead guy and put all your attention on the guy that's dying because you don't want 2 dead guys. So they felt me for a pulse. I didn't have one. They couldn't get any intravenous lines into me because all of my veins had collapsed because of the massive blood loss. And when they put an oxygen mask on, it should have steamed up to show that I was breathing, but it didn't. So they declared me dead, pushed me in a corner. Fortunately, one of the medics had to walk past me to get some equipment to go and work back on Milky. And as he did, he said that my eyes started to flare, which meant that my heart was beating. So he alerted some of the other medics. They came over and got to work on me. And 3 days before I was injured, whoever's in charge of the military medical world had cleared this brand new technique to be used, where if you couldn't get intravenous lines into somebody's veins, you could drill into their tibia and their fibia and administer fluids that way. Anyone see the problem? I didn't have a tibia or a fibia. They had been completely torn off by this IED. So Charlie and Millsy, the 2 medics there, made some very brave and very courageous decisions. And you've got to bear in mind, right, we're not in a hospital. We're in the back of a Chinook helicopter that's doing this, trying to avoid RPGs and mortars, covered in sand and dust, and there's chaos everywhere. They made some very brave and courageous decisions to drill into my hip bone, one in the front, one in the back, and try and administer fluids that way. I think they called it the iliac crest, was the part they did. Anyway, the first time it failed because they didn't pull the skin tight enough. So they corrected the mistake, tightened the skin, went back in, and within 3 minutes, they said that I was awake, responsive, and coherently answering their questions. They said the first thing that I said was that my ass hurt, which is not a Royal Marines thing. It was because I was laying on some pebbles that were pressing up into my bum. Charlie, the female medic that was on that, helped me. To her, that was an incredible sign that I was going to be okay. So she started bawling and crying because she knew I was going to be okay. They got me back to Camp Bastion, to the field hospital, and then the surgeons that were working that day had a look at the damage done to my limbs and decided the only way that they were going to be able to save my life is if they amputated both my legs above the knee and my right arm above the elbow. Anyone squeamish? Okay. These photographs are not that bad. They've been covered up, but they are from the operating table prior to these surgeons in Afghanistan amputating my limbs. So that was my right arm. Underneath that, like I said earlier, is there's no upper bone, no lower bone. It's just like a dog's chewed on it, completely unsalvageable. So they had to amputate it. Which the surgeon's doing here with the cute little duck on his pediatrician's hat as he butchers me in a tent in Afghanistan. If you can't make that out, my face is on the right-hand side of that green cloth at the top. So that's my shoulder and armpit coming out. And that is literally him cutting my right arm off. And then because my legs were in a much worse condition, they did the same to my legs. Now, I have to be very clear when I get here. I had lost, I think, about 28 pints of blood that I'd lost, been pumped in, lost, been pumped in, lost, been pumped in. So if you're looking at that little black box and you're judging me, right, just bear in mind, there was not a lot of blood. left in my body at this point. But these guys got me bandaged up. They got me to a position where they deemed me stable to survive a flight back home to the UK. And I arrived from Selly Oak Hospital in Birmingham at about 4 o'clock in the morning on Christmas Day. Now, when I got there, I spent 3 days unconscious in a coma and another 4 days on the intensive care ward with round-the-clock medical care to make sure I didn't die from any infections from all the dirt and the sand that had been blasted up into my open wounds. After a week in intensive care, they sent me up to the burns and plastics ward, which is where I was to start my long road to recovery. Now, despite being 24 years old at the time, despite having suffered these life-changing injuries, and despite having no idea what the future held, I was relatively positive. I had to work quite hard to be positive, but I felt that for my family and friends that were around me, I needed to kind of fake it a little bit to make them feel good. And I think, and we never talked about this, but I think they did the same. And we just kind of bullshitted our way through the first 2 or 3 weeks where we were trying to figure out what was going on. But then after about 3.5 weeks, this gentleman knocks on my door and he came in. This is January 2008. He introduced himself as the UK's leading medical professional in the field of amputations. So this gentleman had been amputating people's limbs for 33 years at this point, all over the world. There was nothing about life as an amputee that he didn't know. And he came in and told me that I had to start preparing for the rest of my life in a wheelchair. And he told me that he'd never met anybody missing just one leg above the knee that had any success using prosthetics because they were so difficult to use, they were so painful, and they took so much energy that most people just spent the rest of their life in a wheelchair. And then he turned around and left. Now, I'm always very honest when I say this. I'm a pretty chilled out guy, and I enjoy a challenge, and not much really bothers me, but that bothered me. And it's the one time in my life when I've contemplated suicide. You know, when you're in hospital, when you're on a lot of drugs and you're recovering, your whole sleep pattern's messed up. You spend a lot of time 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning on your own when there's no one around. All you can do is think. And that's what I did. I spent a lot of time thinking about what this guy had said and what the rest of my life was going to look like in a wheelchair with people caring for me. And I didn't want to hear that at my age or at that stage of my recovery. So I went into a very dark and lonely and angry place for a while. But about 5 days later, another guy knocked on my door. And this guy came walking in wearing a set of prosthetic legs. And he introduced himself to me. His name was Mick Brennan. And Mick had been injured in Iraq in 2005. He was serving with the army. He had the rear door of a vehicle open, leaving the lower half of his body exposed, and a suicide bomber had detonated and took off both his legs above the knee. And Mick came in and he sat with me and he told me about his story and his recovery and a few of the things that he was doing at that moment. He was still serving in the army when we met. He had just had a new baby and he was on the Paralympic downhill ski team. So he told me some of the things that I could expect to achieve as a guy missing both his legs above the knee, but he also made it very clear that because I'd lost my dominant arm, it was going to be a little bit more tricky. But when Mick left, I went from, rock bottom to sky high. This guy had given me hope, and that hope very quickly turned into determination. So I got a laptop brought in my room. Does everyone remember what a dongle is? So I got a dongle to get onto the internet, and I started doing all this research on amputees and amputations and prosthetics. And I was just doing as much research as I could, trying to figure out what my life was going to look like and see if I could find anybody with similar injuries to me who was out there living their life to the fullest. Now, after 6 weeks in total, I moved to a place called Headley Court Rehabilitation Centre to start my long road to recovery and then eventually be issued with my prosthetic legs. Now, when I got there, I kind of knew that I had two choices. I could amble my way through my rehab, make a little bit of progress here, make a little bit of progress there, reclaim some of my life and some of my independence and do okay. Or I could turn up there, set some goals, create some plans, and then wake up every day and start executing on those plans. And so that's what I decided to do. Now, my unit was still out in Afghanistan at this point. They still had 5 weeks left to serve. I knew they were going to come home and have 9 or 10 weeks, what we call post-operational tour leave, to be with their families and to decompress. Then they would come back to our unit down in Taunton, and we'd all start getting ready for the ceremonial Meadows Parade, where a VIP comes, all the men and women from the unit, all their families from all over the world come, and it's just a really good, feel-good day. So I set a goal that when that day came, rather than be pushed on the parade ground in a wheelchair, which is what I'm sure they all expected me to do, I was going to get to a reasonable level of independence where I could stand on the sidelines, walk on the parade ground, stand shoulder to shoulder with those men that I fought with, and then receive my medal in the only way which in my mind I thought was acceptable. Now the rehab was brutal, and I don't mind admitting that it pushed me mentally, physically and emotionally to my breaking point, and sometimes beyond it. There were tears and temper tantrums and foul language. I lost my temper a lot due to frustration and how difficult all of it was. But I kind of adopted this mindset that as long as I make like at least 1% progress every day, if I can just take one more step, wear my legs for 10 minutes longer, achieve these tiny little goals, they're all eventually going to stack up and then hopefully get me to a position where when this Meadows Parade comes around, I'm going to be fit enough and strong enough and capable enough to go out there and do what it was that I wanted to do. And that day eventually came. And with the help of what's called a quad pod, because I hadn't quite mastered balance or any of that yet, I managed to achieve what I set out to achieve. I stood on the sidelines, walked down a parade ground, stood shoulder to shoulder with those guys, and received my medal in the way that I'd envisioned. Thank you. This gentleman in the middle, that's the female grabber. He was my sergeant major in Afghanistan. We both have a giant copy of this photo in our homes because of obviously what we went through together. So it's particularly special to me to have him there to pin that medal on my chest. I guess as a sign of the progress that I had made to that point in my recovery. But I went home that night, and it's not often that I sit down and feel proud of myself. I just end up moving on to the next thing generally. But I felt quite proud of what I had done here, and I started reflecting on this journey, and I kind of realized that this is what I need to do with my entire life. Not just my rehab, like my fitness, my finances, my family, my career, whatever was important to me, I needed to set goals in those areas, create plans around them, and then get up every day and execute. And it was great because it kept me constantly thinking about forward progress and forward momentum. I never sat still long enough to get in my head and think how terrible my situation was, or feel sorry for myself, or get down about it. I was constantly out just striving for the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And it was great. It got me a certain way. Things were improving, particularly in my rehab. But something was still holding me back a little bit. And I couldn't quite figure out what it was. So my intention was to just get rid of all my distractions, spend a little bit of time every day thinking about how I can reach that next level in my recovery and regain some of my life. And then it kind of hit me. To that point, I've been using my prosthetic legs, and I do have an arm, I just couldn't be bothered to wear it today. I've been using my prosthetics as, I was going to say as a tool. They are a tool, but I was using them as a part-time tool. And then I realized, I'm not a lizard, my limbs don't grow back, and they're not going to grow back. So I needed to change my mindset around being an amputee and being a prosthetic user, and stop using them part-time and embrace my situation and try and push it as far as I could. Now, back when I was in hospital and I got the dongle, I discovered a guy called Cameron Clapp. Now, Cameron was from California. In 2002, when he was 15 years old, he was at a 9/11 memorial garden with his brother and his friends, and he had been drinking. On the way back home, Cameron was obviously so drunk that when he crossed the train tracks to get to his house, he neglected to see the freight train coming towards him. And he was hit with a freight train. It instantly took off both his legs above the knee and his right arm almost to his shoulder. And when I found Cameron online, what blew me away was that this guy wasn't just surviving as a triple amputee, this guy was thriving. You know, he was still out in the ocean surfing. He could run with special prosthetics. He didn't have any adaptations in his car. He could drive anything. He didn't use a wheelchair. He didn't have a carer. He was doing all the things that I wanted to do, but was struggling to do as the first triple amputee in the UK from the conflict with no mentor, and all the things actually that my team were telling me weren't possible. So I used to watch his videos, read his blogs, see what he was up to on his social media, and I used it to push me, you know, beyond those plateaus and those sticking points that I got in rehab. But then I knew that if I wanted to be as good as him or as close to that as possible, that I needed to meet him and train with him and live with him and learn from him. So I sent him an email. I didn't expect him to get back to me, but he did within a week. We exchanged stories, became friends. He introduced me to his team, to Randy. Randy's the tech guy, and to Chad, Randy, and Cameron, very American. There's a whole team of people behind the scenes that will build the legs, program the legs, train you to use them, same with the arm. They all started giving me advice and information and tips and to help me to progress through my rehab. Not just when I was in prosthetics, but when I was without them and without using my wheelchair. And so my rehab kind of accelerated exponentially. And I would go into Headley Court on a Monday, sit down with my team, talk about the plan for the week, and we're doing it by Wednesday because of all the extra help and support I got. So it was great. Now, about 6 or 7 weeks into these email exchanges, Randy said to me, look, Mark, we're glad we're helping you, but if you really want to live independently and be anywhere near to the level of independence that Cameron is, you need to come out and meet him and spend a couple of weeks training with us. Now, I didn't need asking twice. I instantly got on the internet, booked the plane for the 9th of June 2009. I'd put a little bit of weight on at that point because I was still consuming about 3,000 calories a day, but in a wheelchair. So I locked myself in the gym and I got as fit and as strong as I could because I didn't want to waste a second of my time when I was out there. And then 2 days before I was due to fly out, Randy emailed me. He said, Cameron's coming in tomorrow, we're all set up. Can't wait to see you. By the way, you have to come on your own. You can't bring your wheelchair. Now, at that point in my recovery, I couldn't walk around my house, my front room, without being in extreme pain, without sweating profusely, without getting exhausted because of the energy it took. And these guys wanted me to fly to the other side of the world. And I don't mind admitting that I thought seriously about backing out. And I talked to my wife about it, and we discussed it. And then I slept on it, and I got up the next day. It's amazing what a good sleep will do, And I just thought, you know what, I'm going to go out there. And if they can't help me, and if it's a disaster, and it all goes terribly wrong, then I'll just come back, pick up where I left off, and carry on. So 9th of June 2009, hopped on a plane, went out to Oklahoma to meet Cameron, a bunch of his friends and his team, and underwent a 3-week intensive bilateral above knee amputee boot camp. Cameron is the guy in the top left corner with the green shirt on next to me. Now that first week, we went to an event called the Amputee Coalition of America, where hundreds of amputees descend on a chosen hotel, and they have educational workshops, seminars, they do mentoring, they do to a regular hotel guest, it probably looks like they were filming The Walking Dead because there were like legs and arms all over the place. But I got so many people that just gave me help and advice and tips and information who have been living this way longer than me, who helped me. We did training. I walked up and down that driveway. I think I finished one day at like 1 o'clock in the morning, just trying to figure out how to walk down a ramp, because it's different to walking flat, it's different to walking downstairs. Like I said, we went to educational seminars and we learned about the technology that we were walking on. The gentleman in the bottom right with the blue shirt with his back to you, if you've ever seen a movie called A Dolphin's Tale, about a dolphin that gets his tail amputated, Kevin Carroll is the man that made that tail for Winter the Dolphin. So if you can put a tail on a dolphin, you can put a leg on an idiot like me. And he did. And all of this, combined, the education, the empowerment, the mentoring, the training, all of that combined enabled me to take my recovery and my life to a completely different level. And these guys gave me back the opportunity to do things that I never thought I'd get to do again. So I got to do the fun stuff, jumping out of planes and all that stuff we used to do in the military, which was always a good time. I got to do some of the mundane stuff, like painting and chores. I stopped painting very shortly after that. I just wanted to take a photograph. But on a serious note, if something gets taken away from you, even if you don't enjoy doing it, if you have the opportunity to do it again when you think you never get to, you'll do it and you will appreciate it on a whole other level. I got to learn to drive again. So Cameron was the first triple amputee in the world. I was the second to be able to drive an unadapted vehicle, just using my phone and a Bluetooth app that connects and changes the mode that I'm in. And I got to have fun. I know it doesn't look like I'm having fun, but I got to do normal things like ride roller coasters and go to theme parks, which as a father of 3 now is quite important to me. But it was 109 degrees that day in Texas. We'd been walking around for 8 hours. I was not in the best of moods. And on the way back to the car, the way I felt, physically, mentally, and emotionally, the only thing I can compare it to was when I was finishing Royal Marines training. We've got to do a 30-mile run with weight across Dartmoor, up and down Dartmoor. That's the way I felt. It was brutal. But I knew it was short-term pain for long-term gain, and it was going to give me my life back and enable me to go and do the things that I do now. Now, when I came back, I had most of my life in order. Everything, all the boxes had been ticked, everything was moving on nicely, but I had a big decision to make about my career. You know, I knew I couldn't deploy, I know I couldn't be promoted. I would have got given a desk job, which would have been okay for a minute, and while I wouldn't have begrudged my friends getting promoted and deploying, I would have found it very difficult to have to listen to the stories and not be able to get involved in all that stuff that they were up to. So, you know, I decided to leave on the 1st of July 2010 and set out on a new adventure. I had no idea what I was going to do. First time in my life I've never had a plan for anything, but I just knew in my heart and in my gut that outside of the constraints of the military, I could explore this life more, achieve more, and, you know, be a more productive member of society. And it's been a wild ride. These last 15 years have been pretty intense. Like I say, I get to do some cool things. I've done a lot of endurance events, fundraisers. I've fathered 2 more children, all the old school way, if you're wondering. I've managed to build businesses. I've got a couple on the go right now. You know, I wrote a book. I'm writing 2 more at the minute. And I'm a Marine. You know, we write with crayons, so that's quite an achievement in itself. But I've had the opportunity to do some really, really cool things, to meet some really, really cool people and be involved in stuff that, had this not happened, I don't think that I would have had those experiences or those opportunities. Now, one of the things I thought I would never get to do again, which probably hit me the hardest, was have the opportunity to represent my country, which is what I joined the military for in the first place. I thought that was gone forever, now that I was injured, now that I was a civilian. But in 2017 and 2018, I had the opportunity again. I had the opportunity to go out. You guys have heard of the Invictus Games? Got to go out there, represent the UK, and fly the flag at Prince Harry's Invictus Games in Canada and in Australia. Now, there's a lot of reasons why I've very much brushed over it now, because that clock down there has gone bright red and it's shouting at me that I'm over time. But I've very quickly brushed over a lot of the stuff that I've been able to do in the last 15 years that I've been involved in. And there's many, many reasons and factors why I've been able to do it. But I think for me, what I always go back to is what I said at the beginning, and what I've found in the last 15 years is that no matter what challenges I'm facing, or any of us are facing, whether they're personal or professional, what I've understood and learned is that if you set goals around those challenges, you get the right kind of people around you to help you achieve them, and you're proactive in managing your mindset when the other obstacles, challenges, failures, etc. turn up, you really can go on and take something which at one time in your life you thought was total shit and turn it into something that isn't. Guys, I'm 4 minutes over. I would love to do questions, but I don't know if I'm allowed. Someone's waving at me at the back. Am I in trouble? Uh-oh. I am going to stay. I'm going to stay for dinner. Absolutely. Yeah, and if anyone wants to dance with me later, let me know. We're pretty good. Guys, thank you so much. I appreciate your time.